Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hit It podcast. I am super stoked about this interview here today. I have Elizabeth Montavon in the virtual studio to talk slalom skiing and a bunch of other topics about water skiing. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love this podcast. The thing about skiing is we're kind of in all corners of the globe, but podcasts really bring us together. It's a great medium for us. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Well, I told you the other day offline, I want to give a big shout out to Matteo Lazzari because the first time I heard you on a podcast was Matteo's podcast, and it was unbelievable. So if you have not heard that podcast, go to Matteo's podcast, the Water Ski podcast, and listen to that one. It's a really good episode. I wanted to get right into women's slalom at the top of the episode. You are, I think you almost went to every tour stop except the last one in England, with this recent European tour. I wanted to get your take on that. And I also wanted to talk about women's slalom because it's just this year is crazy. It's just you don't know who's going to be into the final, who's going to win, what's going to happen. So tell us all about it. What's going on here this summer?
I am so excited about the state of women's slalom and where it's headed, and we can dig into that later. I have a lot of theories about why I think it's taking off and where it's headed, and where it will eventually parallel with men's slalom. But yeah, the European tour, what an incredible experience that is for us as skiers. It's different than American Pro Tour stops. And I think we're all mature enough to know that when I say different, I don't mean better or worse, right? It's just a different kind of experience. And that's so special because if I wasn't a pro skier and the water ski pro tour wasn't developing in the way that it is, I wouldn't have that opportunity to ski in these foreign countries. So, really incredible, and quite the adventure. So, my first time to the continent of Africa at all, and then let alone to ski at the Marrakesh Pro, which was an incredible experience. Quite literally, a swimming pool dug and lined in the middle of the desert. So, never skied in a swimming pool before. That was incredible. And I placed third there. So
Yeah.
finally a podium finish after a really rough start to the season, placing, I think, like a last and a second to last at the beginning of the season was really hard for me after coming off of a third at Moomba. So started to feel more like myself again. And then we went on to Monaco, the Monaco Slalom Cup, took another third there, and really enjoyed the south of France and the hospitality there. I mean, I know nobody believes me until you experience it, but they actually have baristas on site at these
Wow.
tournaments in Europe and Africa because people take it seriously in a different way, right? They want a little cafe au lait and they want to flip out their folding chair and they write down the scores on their little notepads instead of refreshing IWWF. They write it all down and they have their coffee. And I was like, am I playing tennis or is this water skiing? Like, this feels so posh. So yeah, that was a really fabulous tournament. And then we went on to the Boda Ski Pro-Am, which is just outside of Madrid, and then to the San Gervasio Pro-Am, which is outside of Milan. And I took a fifth and a sixth there. But yeah, it skiing on the European tour demands a different kind of skill set than skiing in our extremely perfect and pristine sites here in the US. And I love that challenge. That's the kind of person I am. So, got home from our stint on the European tour, and I was ranked third on the Water Ski Pro Tour leaderboard in the world. And then after Oxford, I think I moved down to fourth, but still, that's career highs for me. The past 3 years, I haven't made any higher than eighth. That's where I've ended up every season. So I was tired of the number eight, and finally I'm
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
somewhere.
Well, that's amazing. Let's talk about the Marrakesh Pro real quick because you're like on the tip of Africa there. And it's almost like you were saying, this has put the sport in a different light as far as we're almost in the video game world where you're like, select your site. Do you want to go to Africa, England? I mean, it had a different feel of it. And then we got to obviously see the action. A lot of that was on the Water Ski Broadcast Company, so that was really cool. But I remember going back and when I was watching that, I mean, you guys literally were skiing in the desert, and then there's like a train in the background, and it was like, where in the world are we? And I told you this the other day. It's like I wanted to like quit my job and like be a professional slalom skier. It's like this adventure looks incredible. So talk to us a little bit about that experience because I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the first. pro tournament that they had in Africa. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. First pro tournament in Africa. And I mean, isn't that kind of the point? Isn't that what these tournaments are supposed to look like? Is something where you want to do it. That's kind of the
Sure.
whole message that we're driving behind water sports, right? Is this is fun. And this was a very unique brand of fun. But yeah, quite literally out in the desert, the infrastructure that they managed to build out of nothing for us was insane. They had a whole building designed just for the skiers to get ready in. So like that's where everybody put their
Wow.
ski bags. There was a yoga mat for every skier. We had privacy. That was where we got ready. There was a building like with, facilities, bathroom, kitchen, washing machine, kind of like the whole standard 9 yards. Then they had another building that was for hospitality and meals. So everything was catered, white linen tablecloths, gold silverware. Like we don't eat that well at tournaments usually. You know what it's like. You pack a
Right.
cooler and that's what you have at
Yeah.
tournaments. So everything was catered. That was incredible. Then down the side of the lake, they had a VIP building. So all of the sponsors, they actually had their own separate hospitality down on the side of the lake where they could watch the skiing. And then there was just the stuff we're not used to. They had the luxury cars out on display for everybody to look at. It was just such a bizarre experience in a good way. There
Yeah.
was, oh my God, this woman, she was there just to mop the dust off of the dock from the desert. So like
Wow.
every 5-10 minutes she was mopping down the dock, and I'm like, we're not we're not opposed to being dirty. Like we're water skiers. You don't this is so unnecessary. But it was a very different experience.
Wow. Incredible. No, it's certainly, I guess, even in the days, and this always comes up on this podcast, it always we always return, and I think most water skiers return to the hot summer night days of ESPN. This was such a different look this year from an international standpoint. I don't know if it had more like a racing flair to it, but it was this international vibe that we got to see that, again, I don't think we've ever seen. And what was really cool, like you're saying, is not only did you get to ski in the tournament, you did really good in the tournament. Of course, that's what you're there for, but to be introduced to these cultures and then to bring our sport to these cultures, I think is a like a triple bonus.
Absolutely. You know, the thing about hot summer nights is, and like you said, how people like to talk about the old glory days of water skiing. A lot of the lakes were lake sites, rivers, more accessible to spectators, right? They were places where people were going to be regardless of the tournament. Therefore, the conditions were probably not ideal. They probably were more in the vein of like a Moomba Masters, which is one of my favorite tournaments anyway. But everybody knows Moomba is difficult to ski at.
Sure.
This tournament was pristine in its own way. Was the water viscosity a little different because we're talking about a different type of lining? And was the water temperature different? Okay, sure. Like, but that's stuff we're all used to factoring in to the equation of our set. So it wasn't difficult to ski because it was really rolly. It's a public lake. There's other boats, right? The kind of spectacle and show of it is we're really isolated. We're somewhere we've never been before. There's components of luxury that we've never experienced before. And these are the types of brands and people that sponsor sports, like you mentioned, like racing. So I think that's really the vein we're headed in. And it makes sense, right? Skiing is precision, it is highly technical, it's
Yeah.
very expensive. So I think that's the direction we're going. And I have a lot I could say about that because of my job. I work with professional race car drivers, and I've learned a lot from them in how they pitch their sport to sponsors. So that's a whole other conversation we can have.
No, you know what? When you said that, what it reminded me of is I think it was late 90s, early 2000s when the Masters was sponsored by Rolex. It was the ads were about precision and the Oyster Perpetual. That was the watch that they would always, sponsor the Masters with. But there's been glimpses of touching those markets, and I think we've just seen that again, and we saw it in such a different way. So I don't know where y'all are headed next year with that and where the Water Ski Pro Tour, but I think that this is a really cool element where in Europe in particular, that you could start in Africa and then basically travel up through Europe and do it in a matter of time where it was worth the experience. It wasn't like you were buying one plane ticket coming back home. They did it in a manner which you guys could continue to follow each other all the way up. And tell us a little bit about that experience because it's like I saw a couple of people at the very end. I think Adam Sedemeyer was one of them. He just went to the England tournament and then, he flew over there for that. But for the most part, the whole field stayed with each other the whole way.
Yeah. So at the beginning there, we actually fit in 3 tour stops in 3 countries in 10 days.
Wow.
That's a lot of skiing and a lot of travel in a very confined period of time. So it is a big undertaking, like mentally, physically, emotionally. However, it does make it doable for a lot of us who do work, and we either try to work while we're over there or we take PTO. So I love that they have managed to do that and find a way to make it work. It's really good to kind of, check in with some of the European skiers and be like, okay, if I have to get between this city and this city in a day and I need to make sure my skis make it, what airline should I fly? Which city should I actually fly and
Sure.
just rent a car and drive a little bit longer? So learning those logistics has been a huge component to all of this. Last year was the first time I did anything on the European tour. So learned a lot, definitely did it the logistics better this time around. And I think like the result of that was I placed a little bit higher. I had less mental load to deal with. But I think it's incredible what they're able to execute in 4 to 5 weeks. I know that there's rumors that next year Greece is going to be back on the
Nice.
Chiapas Pro-Am Chiapas Battle, which we all loved. And, again, really unique culture that meshes with water skiing, and we have an experience that's unlike anything I've ever had before. I have heard rumors that there's something in the works in Dubai, possibly. I can't even get my head around the idea of getting to go to Dubai and then water ski, right? But
Sure.
if this is the direction it's headed, and more of the pro tour ends up being in Europe, Africa, Asia, whatever it may be, because that's where partners see value. They see it as something to invest in, like a racing, right? Where it's worth their time and money. I'm all for it. Like, we'll find a way to make it work. Because this is the uncharted territory that pro water skiing needed to go in. Instead of trying to, you know, be hot summer nights again, where do we
Right.
actually need to
Right.
go? What doesn't exist yet? And let's pursue that. And I think we're headed down that path.
That's awesome. You mentioned Greece, and I'm like, you talk about cultures. Is there anything better than the idea of competing as an athlete in Greece? Like historically, the Olympic, all that, history we learn about. And so if you could couple that together with Africa and everywhere else you were with Dubai, unbelievable. So let's pull that conversation from an international conversation to the United States. We talked about those hot summer night days. They were all over the country. We were in Chicago, we were in Wichita, we were in Florida, we were in California, wherever it was. Um, but here's an idea, and I would like your opinion on this idea. One of the places that I've always wanted to ski is right outside of San Francisco in Berkeley at Berkeley Aquatic Park. And back in the day, if you talk to the legends of our sport, the conditions were not favorable,
Mm-hmm.
but like everybody remembers that tournament, and you were literally right outside of San Francisco. And so I'm wondering, and this is just me thinking out loud, we're kind of still in those inroads of good conditions, not so good conditions, and really bad conditions. The idea of trying to find locations that are basically promoted on the idea of a city.
Mm-hmm.
So, can I go to the San Francisco Cup? Can I go to the New York City Cup? Whatever. That kind of idea, but I think there would have to be some type of understanding before you engage in that it may not be Okehele Park conditions, right? So, so I wanted to get your perspective on that because certainly the European tour you're getting really, really good conditions for the most part. Whether we could facilitate that on a big stage in the United States, I think is the question. And if the question is no, we can't quite do that, what would be acceptable to those people that know what they're getting into, but to increase exposure for the sport?
I think that we could execute on those larger venues. We would just have to temper our expectations of the scores, right? So we've seen over the past, we'll say 10 years, we've seen open men's slalom rise to a level where even in much less than ideal conditions, there is at least 8 men who are going to run around 3 at 41 off pretty consistently. Most of the field is going to run 39, and it's probably going to take 2 scores at 41 to make a final. even in less than ideal conditions. Is women's slalom at that point yet where you could take the host of women's slalom to a site that is not ideal and they're going to perform to around their average level? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And like you and I have spoke about before, open women's slalom is headed in a direction that will soon parallel the men. I know the field is less, and so that seems impossible to achieve. But what I noticed a lot in Europe, because even if you're working, like I work remotely, a lot of the time you're just with the larger group of skiers. So you get to know each other more because, we're all basically on a big field trip together.
Yeah, right.
And what I've noticed with open women's slalom is these women are realizing there's a lot of technique, tools, resources, lots of components that we haven't necessarily been privy to because we've kind of been on and off the pro tour over the
Right.
last 20 years. So without experience, the bar naturally is going to fall, right? If you stop practicing something, you probably will get worse at it. And then you look at slalom as a whole, it's advancing. So there was a period of time where women's slalom and those of us skiing women's slalom were not privy to those things that could have helped us raise the bar a little bit. And I believe that contributes a lot to why, for recent history, it's been a Whitney Regina battle, right? That's what we all have come to expect in pro women's slalom. This year, I would be surprised if the battle for first wasn't between Whitney Regina, but also Jamie, Allie Nicholson, and Manon, right? That's five. That's probably the most women we've ever had who we expect to run 39 in a final in history. So we're starting to see there is a core group that all could vie for first, just like there is in the men's, right? You have
Sure.
Nate Smith, Freddie Winter, Will Asher, Rob Hazelwood's won a couple tournaments now. Cole McCormick is the US Masters champion. So if
Sure.
you were to see any of those five guys on top of the podium, that's not a surprise. So I think as we see pro women become more self sufficient in tuning their own equipment, learning technique on their own, developing it on their own, learning how to study the body, different body types of men and find a body type that parallels their own and work on technique that suits those builds. There's all these little things that I think are driving improvement in women's slalom. And, really, that's the most relevant demographic of professional slalom skiing to the broader audience. None of us ski at 36 except for open men for the most part. The majority of slalom skiing is happening at 34 miles an hour or slower. And so I think we're going to see a lot of growing interest in women's slalom as the field gets bigger, the majority of it gets better, and the broader slalom audience starts to learn from these women.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's really interesting just to take what you first said. The narrative going into this year, I think, was dominated outside of slalom skiing by how well tricking was going, right? Like, we never seen tricking like this. And, people near, we just had Jake Abelson on the show. Are like, you were like a trick away from 13,000 points. This is crazy. And then, but there's five, six other people who could do it. What we've seen after this tour and what we've seen in both men and women's slalom, I think the narrative has now changed. It's anybody's game, right? It
Totally.
used to be we'd go watch it, we would see there was very predictable outcomes. That started to change a little bit last year. Today, as we sit right now at this portion of the season, I don't think anybody has a clue who's going to win the next slalom tournament on the women's side or the men's side. It's a completely mixed bag, and so that's making it from a spectator point of view extremely, extremely exciting. That being said, your second part of your comment with the 34-mile-an-hour skiing, I can't say that enough. You mentioned this the other day when we were talking offline about the physics of men's slalom versus the physics of women's slalom. But really, the physics come down to just how fast we are going on our
Mm-hmm.
ski. And talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, as it relates to women's slalom to, let's say, masters men or a men three, I mean, these scores that the professional women are putting out a lot of times would beat the masters men's score, right? And
Yeah.
so um, it's almost like those competitors and those divisions do themselves a bit of a disservice if they're only looking at their own technique with inside their own division and they're not looking to women's slalom skiing to progress not only their individual capacity, but their division as a whole.
Absolutely. And, Stevie and I were having a great conversation yesterday in the boat. I don't know why in his set we started talking about House of the Dragon, which we're watching, and we were arguing about which dragon we would both like rather ride. But then we quickly got back onto slalom skiing and talked about water speed and the importance of understanding the work zone of water speed, where you need to begin your swing, where your swing needs to end, and where you can be fast and where you should be fast and where you should be slow. And I think traditionally we've talked about the work zone. People think of it as just that. It's a place to do work. And so frequently they will add to their lean, they will try to add swing. And that's not really what I mean by the work zone. What I mean is that area where you need to have started your swing before the boat gets too far away from you, and then where you need to end your swing because if not, you're actually just pulling long, right? And so there
Yeah.
are areas where you need to have a certain amount of speed. To essentially keep the swing going. And in men's slalom, they're faster for a shorter amount of time. What
Hmm.
that looks like if you try to take it to 34-mile-an-hour skiing is you're going to be too slow at the buoy and you're going to be too narrow. If you try to work for as short of a period of time as men do, you're never going to make it. And you're going to feel like, okay, now I have to long pull and now we need to start moving my boots because I feel like I can't plane long enough, and let's try all the different ZO letters. And it starts
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
spiral, and we've all been there. But the truth is the swing pattern and the rate of speed of change in open women's slalom is something that everybody should be studying because there's only so much the rest of us can learn from men at 36.
Wow, that's incredible to think about that work zone. I don't know if I've ever really thought about it in that way of how that really changes what you can do right out of the buoy as far as this length of pull. I know I have twin boys that are going to be competing at the nationals this year, and we started them at 15 off. And I spoke to Chet about this actually. I said, I had to abandon long line. I knew I grew up that way, but I've got to teach them the right swing, and we're going to go 15. I know the wakes are big. And one of my boys getting a really good offside turn, and he's coming up short at number two because he's coming around one and he's short at number two. And teaching that work zone at age 7, right, is so critical. But that work zone, even for a junior competitor, will be different at 30 miles an hour, where he'll max out eventually, and then 32, 34, 36. And really, I think too, when you look at women's slalom, it has been understudied what the work zone is has at 34, and then even below that, because a lot of the skiers that are now skiing 32 miles an hour, they've had to change their work zone. And I don't know if we necessarily spend a lot of time on that. So if you're constantly just looking at 36 miles an hour of skiing, and then you go out to the lake and you try 32 miles an hour or something, your technique has to look different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that there aren't pieces of men's skiing we can't work into our rhythm and timing at 34, at 32, but ultimately at 34, my swing should be longer than
Sure.
any open men's skier. I ski with, I pull my husband Stevie every day, so I feel his swing on the wheel. I could never swing for that short of a duration of time and then try to run the scores that I run. So if you're at 32 miles an hour, absolutely that swing actually needs to be a little bit longer. And swing is different than pull, right? So then there becomes nuances to this conversation.
Sure. Wow. Well, let's take a real step back to your beginnings in water skiing. Your family has been in the sport for a very long time. A lot of our listeners will know that your strongest event at one time was trick skiing, and then you made your way into the professional ranks of slalom skiing. Just wanted to touch briefly on that because I think it's so important. And you know, you'd have to go back, trying to compare somebody that has had success on a trick level the way you did and then almost go full into slalom skiing. We're talking like Christy Overton. Like there's been some people along the way. Of course, we've had some overall skiers like Christy or Regina and things like that. But really to watch when you really started to come on the scene strong in slalom, it was really something special because um, tricking is just done at such a slower space. It's such a different event. Talk to us about that and talk about your family's involvement in the sport.
Yeah, so I'm a third generation pro water skier, something I'm very proud of. My grandparents are Cecil and Sandy Manier. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us. And I mean, of course, I would love them to be around just so I could spend time with them, but they would be fascinated with the state of water skiing and all the technology and the scores and where the skill is at. So I really wish they could witness it today. But Cecil and Sandy were very much involved in skiing down here where I am now, Okeechobee Park, when Okeechobee was first, kind of being developed. So even though I didn't grow up down here, in a lot of ways, it feels very familiar because it's where our family has been in and out of for three generations. But my grandpa Cecil, he was a three eventer. I think he preferred jump the most. Sandy was a three eventer as well. She was there for a good time. She loved tournaments because they were social, and trophies were just, an accidental byproduct of all of that. I wish sports were that easy for me to not really try and still bag a few trophies. But Cecil was also very heavily involved in the creation of Mastercraft boats, as in the company. So down here in South Florida, Cecil and Rob Shirley were in the driveway putting together fiberglass and trying to build the very first Mastercraft boats. So
Wow.
Cecil was very much a promo guy for many years. His whole theory was there should be a Mastercraft boat in every garage in America. So he was very much an advocate of growing the sport, not growing his own importance in the sport. And that's something that I think my family has really tried to maintain as a thematic in how we approach skiing is it needs to be about getting more people on skis, more people having fun, arming more people with knowledge, as opposed to I'm really big and important and I'm not helping anybody with my importance.
Sure.
My mom is still skiing today, but very known back in the 80s for her pro trick career, which she did as a very young person. She's 12 years old and skiing in pro women's tricks. She actually made the team for the 35 and up worlds this fall. So she's on the team.
Wow.
It's her first worlds. So very excited for her around that. My brother was a very good trick skier, five-time national champion. And he also won nationals in slalom, I think, even though he was a trick skier. So he was kind of that first in our family to start that transition. Like, I'm a good trick skier, but I can be a good slalom skier.
Sure.
Yeah, and then there's me, probably objectively the least natural water skier out of my family, the worst at it, but I've worked really hard to be good at it. And yeah, I tricked for many years. I got really good at it. I wasn't much of a flipper. I didn't really enjoy being inverted, and I saw where pro women's tricks was about to
Mm.
go. I had a great conversation with Erica Lang in Monaco, actually. She was getting ready to trick because they included pro tricks for the first time. And
Okay.
her bag was next to my bag and she was stretching and she looked over at me and she's like, "Do you remember back in the day when it was just you and me tricking?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You were the only one I had to beat." And I was like, "I know." I lost a lot of tournaments to you. And she's like, "I wish you would trick again." I was like, "Well, my thoracic spine doesn't have enough mobility to do half wraps anymore, and I'm not going to flip. So I'm going to leave the tricking to you." But she actually asked me, she was like, "How did you go from being a trick skier to being good at slalom?" And I was like, "Well, I knew I didn't want to flip. And I knew I wasn't going to be any good at it. And I saw where you were taking pro women's tricks and where everybody has now followed to.
Mm.
But I knew I wanted to keep skiing at a high level. I love the challenge of pro tournaments. So, what event can I do?"
Yeah.
And it wasn't about to be a jumper because that's a whole level of dangerous that I'm not equipped for. But I had slalom before, like many of us, we kind of grew up trying all the events. And so, yeah, everybody knows the story. Chet was like, "Why don't you just try to be a pro skier? And if you pro slalom skier," and he goes, "If you suck at it, nobody's going to care." And I was like, "You're right. There's nothing to lose here. I'm just going to give this a shot." And so it's been, I mean, what, like 7 or 8 years now of a
Wow.
journey
Wow.
to let's rebuild my slalom skiing. Like I'm tired of two at 35. How do we reinvent the wheel here? And here we are.
That is crazy. That's an awesome testament to think like if you specialized, and it wasn't necessarily like you were specialized, but specialized in or what people think is their strongest event, that they kind of give up and say, well, that's what I was. But you've like not only reinvented your slalom, but like reinvented your career as a skier has been crazy to think about. And I think that's something for our listeners to consider. And you may relate to this comment a little bit by what you just said. Certain people like to do certain things, right? Like if you like to flip and go upside down, tricking is a great sport. If you like to be on the edge, jumping's probably where you need to be. If
Yep.
you like to go really fast but have a lot of technical things in your slalom skiing is where you need to be. And I always said like if I was a snow skier, hands down, I'd been in downhill. Like
Yep.
that's I just
Same.
yeah, I just love speed. Like nothing against the people. I think it's amazing when they do the aerials and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, wow, but I'd have been on that downhill slope every day. And I think understanding what you gravitate to is really important. And I really like how you said that.
I think we all have to do that in our skiing, right? We have to look at what natural attributes do we have that like you wouldn't necessarily look for in athletics otherwise. I am very comfortable going very fast. It doesn't freak me out. It actually slows down for me. My skiing happens in slow motion for me, even though I'm moving really, really fast. That's an advantage. And so you really need to look into who you are as a person
Right.
and what can you lean into that gives you that little edge above everybody else. If I'm in a tournament and I feel a little too fast and down course, that's fine with me as long as
Right.
I know what to do next. And that's a skill I have to learn. But speed in itself isn't going to freak me out. And I never had that edge in my trick skiing. I was really consistent. If you needed somebody to stand up the run, I could stand up my run, but it wasn't going to be the most impressive run out of the field once Erica Lang changed the face of women's tricks.
Sure.
So I was consistently second place, and that's really not enough for me. I'm a growth person. How can we make this better? What new things can I learn, right? And so kind of all of that being said, slalom was just a natural fit for me.
Wow. That's so cool. That is so cool. All right. We've talked a lot about professional water skiing. I want to bring it down to the everyday tournament water skier and the progression of our sport. Um, growing up in the sport, obviously you're not traveling to North Africa to ski. You're probably finding a site, a man-made site, going out there and skiing. Sometimes these tournaments have anywhere from 20 to 50 people on a weekend. They're all volunteer based. You've got judges' ratings. You got to find somebody who can score. You got to find somebody who's the technical controller. You've got Class C tournaments. You've got L, R, and E tournaments. Uh, Talk to us a little bit about where you think the sport is right now and maybe some tweaks that we could potentially just bat around that may help us go into the future.
Yeah, so like we mentioned on the pro side, there's a lot of attractiveness, and I think we're at a point where it's the best product we have to sell at the big high level, right? To draw that kind of awareness. Now, once we start bringing people into the sport and start involving them because there has been enough of that wow factor, how do we keep them in the sport, right? How do we, once we get somebody to consider renting a boat for a weekend and getting up on some combo skis, okay, and they've done that and they want to know what's next. How do we keep them
Right.
interested? We have to remember that the skier experience in a tournament is something they're buying. That is a product or service, however you want to look at it, that they're paying money for. And so, I come from a business background. When you start looking at tournaments in that light, I think a lot of the pieces that we need to fall into place become evident. So we need to keep that in mind that it is just, in fact, a product. Somebody's paying an entry fee for an ideal experience. Now, does this mean your site needs to be perfect? No, that's not what I'm getting at all. It's about the skier and their experience at the tournament. So the types of officials that you're involving in the production of this tournament, the type of dock starter, all those human touch points they're going to have, is it an enjoyable experience or not? And if
Sure.
it's not, that's okay. It's something that's fixable. But I think it really comes down to then a culture question. So within your ski club or your organization, what is the culture really about? And if you haven't revisited that or visited it at all ever, it's a good conversation to have. What do we want our club to be known for? And what experience do we want skiers to walk away from our tournaments with? Now, I'm fully aware that a lot of these tournaments, they are just, in fact, the club members. So they're probably don't have people traveling from out of town to their club. So they're not concerned about, oh, well, so and so is going to go home and say XYZ. But, you know, in Okeechobee, we have a lot of people who travel to get a score, right? It's Florida. You can probably count on the weather. There's a lot to do down here. Maybe it's a family vacation kind of thing. So at Okeechobee, that's a perfect example of a lake that needs to be extremely cognizant of the culture and then how that culture impacts those skiers who have traveled to have an experience there. So, is the dock overly crowded? Do they feel like there's too many people on them? Is the dock starter super competent, right? Do we have enough soap and the right kind of soap for
Mm.
those, you know, rubber bindings? All of these little things, they add up for that skier experience. And a lot of it really just comes down to being a nicer person, being a little bit more considerate, having a lot of empathy. Most of us are skiers or have been skiers, or we love somebody who's a skier. So putting yourself in those shoes and approaching tournaments with empathy goes a long way. You can't fix somebody's score. If they have a bad round, they have a bad round. But being empathetic and helping them identify maybe why it was a bad round or helping them get into a better headspace so they can have a good round in the future usually can kind of make or break that tournament experience for somebody. And we all know, like, if we have fun doing something, we're more likely to keep doing it and to involve people in it. So I think there is a huge connection between empathy and fun. And I think we need to focus on it more. As intangible and maybe silly as that sounds, I think when we look at the future of the sport and the youth, they're an extremely empathetically aware generation. So, and they want to have fun. We all know that, especially if they're kids, right? So, I think we need to start looking at that connection between empathy and fun if we want kids to ski more and stay involved in skiing in the long term.
That is an unbelievable analysis of something that hits the objectivity of the controllable variables all the way down to soap, but talks about the subjectivity of emotions and everything that's attached to it. I mean, not only are they going somewhere for an experience, but the people that they're going to meet, the connections that they're going to make, and hopefully by the end of that tournament, want to be able to come back is going to make somebody want to train every day because I want to have that experience every day and I want to move my skiing to a new level. When you were talking about that, being from Texas, I always think about um, Bennett's right next door in Louisiana. When I was jumping, I could always count that they had everything right. The ramp
Yep.
was right, the boat was dialed in, everything was perfect. So like you wanted to have that good experience and you wanted to go far and you wanted to feel safe and you wanted to feel encouraged. That's where you would go. That's where you would do it. And I think a lot of people do that at Okeechobee too and other parts. And I think that that is something to really challenge people that probably listen to this podcast that run clubs throughout the United States to say, what is our goal? Is our goal purely financial and we're just trying to take care of the homeowners' dues this year? Or do we want to make this a place where we can roll out this level of consistency and experience where people come back for the next 10 years? And
Right.
Okeechobee done a fantastic job of that. I mean, it's like you're if you've been in the sport long enough, your path's going to cross with Okeechobee at some point. And anyway, I don't know, Elizabeth, if I've ever heard it quite like that, but that's certainly something to think about. And I don't think that's been an angle that we've focused very much on is really what is everybody's experience when they're going to these tournaments? Because you can be so dialed in and secluded if you want to be in skiing that
Right.
you don't talk to anybody, you do your thing, and you leave. And I've seen that a little bit in our sport where I grew up in Colorado, which was a really unique community in the winter or in the summer because it felt like the winter sometimes in summer there. But you know you would ski, no one would leave. They would bring their motor home. You'd have a campfire on Friday and Saturday night. You would throw
Yeah.
your hoodie on. You would get up in the morning. And then I think as skiing has evolved over the years, it's kind of been like, I got a 3 round slalom. Can I make it out of there by 4 o'clock?
Yep. Yep.
And when that started to happen, I think we lost those touch points. We lost some of those experiences. And if we can figure out a way to regain that, I think you're definitely onto something there.
Well, and let's just call it like it is, right? A lot of clubs feel the pressure to get everything dialed in. So somebody buys SurePath, maybe they buy a base station, somebody buys a new boat. We bring in a driver, we get the splash eye set up, we build all the towers, we put all the judges in the towers, right? This should be as good, it is good enough, and everybody puts a lot of time and effort and money into that, and I respect all of that. But the truth is, anybody can bring all of those resources together. It's about what you do with them, because there is nuance to that conversation, right? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for these officials who have worked so hard for so many years to bring all these resources together, to take some of that work off their plate of taking it to the next level by leaning into younger officials and younger volunteers, because young people have the energy for this empathy conversation. They have the energy to interact with people. And so I think that we are going to see a lot of these really dependable faces who have made our sport move forward for so long. We're going to see them lean into younger judges and younger officials. Maybe it's people who are, out of college, but they have a slalom rating. Put them in the tower, put them in the boat. They don't mind getting up and changing the rope every single skier. They're good
Right.
with kids. They can sit in the heat all day. Put them in the boat. They don't need to pee as often, right? Put the young people in the boat judging assignments. Like, that makes sense. And then whoever interacts with that judge, they'll probably have a more positive experience because they're bringing that young energy. They don't get worn out. We need that brain power of that old guard doing what they do best, making sure our bases are covered, making sure all the logistics are lined up. But I think that they could alleviate a lot of the labor on themselves by letting young people do what they do best. And young people come with new technology, right? There's new ways to do things that are more efficient, better, faster, whatever it may be. But I think it's time for these two groups to start to mesh, and that tournament experience is going to improve overall.
Yeah, and I was talking to Kevin, our executive director, and he has a huge interest in collegiate sports and collegiate skiing in particular, right? So, you and I both skied in the collegiate world. That is a completely different world. That is an unbelievable world. It is very different than the average weekend experience in the summer at a tournament. But that is a world in which we have to figure out a path to blend into traditional slalom skiing that happens outside of collegiate water skiing, because there is so much energy there. There is so much excitement and passion that it's not like we have to go searching for these resources. They exist. They just have to be funneled over and given the opportunity.
And maybe we've just put too much emphasis on which resources matter and which aren't as important, right? So everybody right now is really valuing SurePath, and I get it. I'm a pro slalom skier. I'm not devaluing SurePath. Obviously, we have one in our boat here, but is that really what you need to put on your tournament? Or do you actually need more judges so that you don't have judges having to judge big groups, get out of the tower and go ski
Right.
immediately? And then that judge has a bad skier experience themselves. And then do they really want to volunteer at tournaments anymore, right? You start to see the pattern of how we're kind of cannibalizing our own enthusiasm. And so I think that making it easier for people to be judges probably is something we need to explore. I know nobody wants to hear that, but let's be real here. I should be a senior trick judge. It should be easy for me to be one, even though I haven't tricked in a tournament in a long time. I was a good trick skier. I keep up with trick skiing. I understand it. I could brush up on everything I need to and pass that test, but there's no avenue for me to do that. So now my ski club doesn't have me as that kind of an asset. I'm only a slalom judge, right? So how can we break down some of those barriers to entry for people to volunteer their time? If we had endless amounts of judges, we could put on tournaments at every club every weekend for the rest of time, right? So I think we need to explore that framework. And I know there's a lot of ramifications that come with making it easier for people to be judges. I'm not blind to that. But I think we would all be remiss to ignore the fact that there are regions of this country that cannot have as many tournaments as they want because of a lack of judges. So, how
Sure.
do we grow the sport if that is the case. I mean, you're in Texas, there's tons of ski lakes in Texas, but I
Right.
know that given the breadth of the actual, geography of the state, it's massive. Getting judges together every weekend in the summer must be difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I would tell you this. I skied in the 3 round slalom, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'm not complaining about this. I love judging. I mean, I'm one of those guys who can sit on a microphone if need be for 10 hours a day if I want to and announce and still not be tired of it by the end of the day. So this is definitely not a complaint, but I do think it goes towards the experience and what you're saying. I sat on it. So we had two groups, skied in group one, group two, I judged, and I was on a tower every time that I judged, and I had to get up in the tower and I had to sit in that tower. And at round three, my back was so stiff from sitting on that tower because you would ski, you know,
Yeah.
go run something. I don't know. I was running, I think 2 at 39 the first round, and then I go sit in a tower. Then I go back out, and then by the end of the experience, you have to balance. Okay, like I have no problem being on a tower, but the reality of it is I don't know if I want to go out my third round because I'm going to pull my back because I've been in a tower for whatever 3 hours today. Is it worth it? And so how how do you think when we do this from because we become very much a part of rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Rankings have been. I mean, we were talking about junior competitors the other day, and back in the day when I was 7 years old to qualify for nationals, it was an EP. It was the
Yep.
EP rating, or you skied a particular score at a regional tournament, you qualified for nationals. Now I pretty much know when I go to the ranking list that my boys are qualified as long as they ski in the regionals, they're going to the nationals. And so some people would argue, based on that system, just to push back and play devil's advocate, that this is the reason we need SurePath because we need to make sure that people aren't, weaving the boat in and out or those types of things. What do you think is the best argument against that argument to say it's more important to have judges even though we're on a ranking system?
Okay, so my question would be around SurePath. Is there money up for grabs? Because that's where that really matters, right? And is anybody trying to run 39? And I know that SurePath, the rules come into play at 38, but let's be honest, SurePath matters the most at 30, 39, and 41, and even at 43. And it's not the driving pattern that people think. If you move into a skier at 39 off, that is not helping them. So I think everybody's kind of gotten
Mm,
it in their heads that a favorable driving pattern driving as it's called, is moving into the skier at every buoy so they have more width. No, for high end slalom, that will effectively kill their line or kill their swing or a little bit of both. So if that's really the only place that SurePath matters, because those scores ultimately matter. If a guy runs 3 at 41 versus 4 at 41 in a pro tournament, that could change how much money he makes.
right.
That's where the SurePath conversation, in my opinion, is super important. Did the driver kill somebody else? Did they help somebody else? And how did they help them? Right? Like that's a conversation for a specific group of judges at that specific tournament, which, by the way, always looks more favorable on TWBC than the actual tournament feels. I don't know what Vince's cameras are, but they always make water look really flat, and that's not the case. So unless you're there and you're skiing it, you don't really know what's going on.
Sure.
But when it comes to growing the sport, right, making things easier, do we adventure into looking at something like bringing back the EP system? I
Sure.
would be curious to know because I grew up having to get my EPs as well. Like I remember those days. If we looked back at participation in tournaments broadly and then nationals back in the days of the EP system, were more people skiing in more things? Or is the ranking system actually serving us as well as it can, right?
Sure.
And I know people are afraid of change in general, like that's the state of being a human. But we have to remember it wasn't that long ago that Corey Picos completely reinvented the points system around tricks. He, went to whoever the powers may be and said, these tricks are overvalued. And a lot of points were slashed. So we need to not be afraid of changing the systems if it helps us make the sport more fun and sustainable.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that response. That was a tough question, and that was a great response.
I love tough questions.
So I want to briefly touch on this because you're you know always pushing stuff out on social media, it seems like. You're in that world, you're in that as a professional, as a skier, but also in your job. Talk to us a little bit about the exposure of water skiing and media outlets and how to continue to grow it. Obviously, what TWBC has been able to do, certainly in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years,
Yeah.
you're starting to see some major fruit from that. Like this is very viable. Um, but I want to get your opinion on that because here's just briefly. I'm going to preface it from an announcer's point of view. So, no doubt, love webcast, been part of webcast, can talk 8, 10 hours, whatever it needs to be. But what I learned about announcing, probably more after COVID, but a little bit before COVID, things got cut down to 15-second clips. And so, no matter how good you announce that day, if you could call it a really good call and you could be there with that athlete in that moment and that clip could survive that 15 seconds and we got, I don't know, 4 clips out of a whole day of filming, there was so much value on social media from 4 15-second clips than a 10-hour webcast. And I
Yeah.
learned that, as we were saying, I was like, man, I don't know how many people are tuning into the webcast, but we've got X amount of views. Oh, and by the way, uh, Get Cindy just sent that one to the moon viral, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about that because there's a blend of obviously covering the sport, covering the event, but then there's this other component of social media, which is really almost like advertising the way I look at it.
Yeah, so I can come at this from both angles really, like as an athlete and then as somebody who works in sports marketing and sponsorship space. So I'll start with the athlete side first. The product that TWBC has made is obviously the best that we've ever had in water skiing. But you're right on. Those short clips, those moments that really highlight the personalities in water skiing, those are going to be what makes or breaks our sport at that exposure level over the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
So I love the production that TWBC has put together. And I think they're really maxing out their capabilities and with the manpower that they have. I think as they grow, we will see them start to dig through the entire day of the webcast and pull those chunks out and build stories around the athletes. And that's really where TWBC has a lot of power is they can build up an athlete or they could tear down an athlete. And I'm not saying that like there's anything malicious that I'm aware of, but that's how these production companies, this is how they make it big is they build the story around the athlete and then the athlete can choose to live out that story or not. Maybe they shy away from it, maybe they don't like that spotlight, but we all have to get comfortable with the fact that if we want skiing to be bigger and better and receive a lot of outside dollars and outside attention, there is going to be a degree of the storyline that is manufactured. And that is true in every other professional sport. And I can say that because I work with every other professional sport. I work with 81 other professional sports on a
Yeah,
daily
wow.
basis. The storylines are manufactured, and that's okay because that's something that you can sell. I think because skiing is so intimate and we're all very involved with each other, the idea of a story being built around a pro skier who I might know because they live down the street from me, that seems inauthentic. That's not
Sure.
really the case. You're just taking components of that athlete and elevating them on a pedestal and saying, hey, look at this. They have this going on. They are this personality. This is
Sure.
something special about them. That's not fraudulent. Now, are there sports where they make things up that are maybe not real? Probably, but that's not the space we're trying to play in, right? We're trying to build stories around these athletes because that is something that can be bought and sold. Now, from the other side of it, as somebody who has seen a lot of sponsorship decks, I would love to bring the conversation back to what we mentioned earlier about motorsports, professional race car driving. I have come to know a lot of women who drive race cars, NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, and their different divisions and their developmental programs, right? And what I've learned about these women is that if they don't raise enough money, they don't have a season. And by
Mm.
raise enough money, I mean at least $1 million to start the season. So we're looking at a sport here that has expensive equipment. They have cars, we have boats. It's finely tuned, and that's very important. We tune skis, we tune boats. They have a whole team of people that tune things. So that's more people on the payroll, right? We travel with really bulky equipment to weird places. They travel with more bulky equipment to
Mm,
even weirder places. It's a magnified version of what we do, but they're getting more dollars. So it costs more, but everybody has seen racing at some point in their life and everybody's raising more money. So, like, what's the disconnect here, right?
right.
I've had the privilege of looking through a lot of these race car drivers' pitch decks, and it's not something I can share, broadly. But these packages that they're pitching to brands, starting at $250,000,
Mm,
moving up to 500,000, and then to $1 million. So if these women are selling a product that starts at $250,000 for one season, and we all know that racing is highly volatile, just like we were talking about. We don't know who's going to win the next pro slalom tournament. It could be anybody.
right.
I would say
Right.
racing is even more volatile. They might not finish the race.
Right.
You don't know who's going to place what. I don't think racing is predictable at all. So they're selling something that is highly unpredictable. They can't say, I'm going to win every race for the rest of this season because I'm the Nate Smith of race car driving. That's like not a thing, right? There's a lot of people depending on that race car driver to raise that money because that's where their jobs come from. They're mechanics, they're engineers. So why can't we sell that in skiing? Well, I think it comes down to we have a product now that's pretty viable. We have a sales skills gap. And I think working on those materials, like what do our pitch decks look like for all the brands that are trying to raise money or the organizers or whoever it may be, because everybody's trying to make this thing happen. We love water skiing, right? I think we really need to look to people in our sport who have exceptional sales skills or sales experience and say, hey, what support materials do you need? And how would you try to sell this thing?
Mm,
How would you package it up? Let's reinvent the wheel here. Like, why not? Right? We've reinvented the wheel in pretty much every other component of water skiing. We've talked about SurePath plenty. That wasn't a thing 10 years ago. And I think we need to look to those experts and then reevaluate how we're selling water skiing. So I think we're going to be dependent on the media companies to pull out those personalities, right? That is the product. So we're going to be dependent on them to build this product and keep building it for us. And then we need to look at, okay, how are we selling this? And what really, like, what are the sales skills and how are we putting it in a document and sending it to brands? And then who are we getting on the phone with and who's actually the person selling it? Because I think that's the missing component, given all the other conversations, I witness at work.
wow. There's so many factors there, but you said that so well about the role in which media plays, but yet the athletes themselves, along with probably our judges, our officials, are the families that are involved. There's so many talented people. I mean, that can definitely sell a product, but coming together with the whole package to present that in a way to really grow the sport and gain exposure, that's incredible. Well, I wanted to ask you this question. It's really a statement, and I would like you to finish the statement. I water ski because.
I feel like a lot of people are going to relate to me. I water ski because it's really hard. And I love the challenge of it, right? Skiing is, there are so many things that need to go right for you to have a PB, and there's so many things that can go wrong, and there's so many things to learn and tweak and explore. And I love that it's not something I can do on autopilot. I love the difficulty and I love the challenge.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I want to give you a handoff to where people can find you, and I want to give a big shout out to your podcast. Your husband Stevie's on that podcast with you. It's actually on my Apple phone when it pops up that, oh, you guys got a new episode. So I try to tune in when I can, but you've got the podcast going. You're obviously skiing. People you want to thank, I just wanted to give you a handoff.
Oh my gosh. So the list of people I need to thank, of course, my coach, Chet Raley, who has been on this incredible journey with me to transition from trick skier to slalom skier and go on this adventure of the new water ski pro tour. I'm always sending him video from abroad and he's, just a text message away, but I could not have done this without him. My husband, Stevie, for being my, daily training partner and actually doing the thing with me. My sponsors, Stoke Skis, they've been behind me for a long time. The best life jackets in the game. Of course, S lines. I've just come to love that rope and those handles so much, and so grateful for the support from Scott there. And then I have a couple new sponsorships in the works. The documents are about to be signed, but I
Wow.
can't say now. But I'm very excited there. Excited to bring some new brands into water skiing. So
Cool.
these are from the outside, but really excited about that. So stay tuned there. You guys can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth Montavon, friend me on Facebook. You can head to my website for a little bit more about me, kind of the bigger high level story. But yeah, I'm close by. I'm a social media message away, and I hope to see you in South Florida soon.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Elizabeth, this has been an awesome episode. We hope to have you back soon, and we're going to be cheering for you for the remainder of this season and on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And until next time, we're signing off.